Well, that's 1 o'clock, so thank you very much for being here. And for those listening to the recording, because you couldn't get into this packed auditorium here, thank you for listening in. My name's Alistair Spears. I'm a product manager in the Office team. I have a kind of interesting role. I generally focus on Office deployment with our large enterprise customers. And generally what that looks like is planning and strategizing different ways of trying to get hundreds of thousands of people, and in some cases millions of people, to use a new version of Office at a time. It's a big challenge, and so it's been quite enjoyable. I've been over here for about 5 years now in Seattle, based out of the Redmond office. I'm originally from Australia, where I worked for Microsoft for a number of years as well, and before then in industry as a software developer. And it's kind of funny, now we see, and I hear more and more people say statements like, every company is a software company now with the cloud and with the changes of business operations and with disruption of all different industries in various ways. And that's kind of interesting. If you're in IT, there's a bunch of challenges that you have to address. And if you're not in IT, you have to start thinking more and more like a software developer to just keep up with a lot of these disruptions that are happening in other industries. So in this topic, we're going to talk a little bit about Excel, but really I want to talk about the wider Office story of how we develop Office. At Microsoft, our Office team, so to speak, is about 10,000 people. And there's probably another 10 to 20,000 partners and peers we rely on in teams like Windows and teams like SQL Server, teams like the Power BI team, for instance. So it's kind of a massive, complex software project. It's probably one of the largest software projects in the world. And we've been at it for 30 years. And so there's every change we make has this opportunity cost of like, do you want to upset the delicate, intricate 30-year-old code base that people rely on that does things that emulate Lotus 1-2-3 that we can't remove because people are still relying on that thing that we introduced in Office 97 and those sorts of things. So it's a really interesting and challenging job. And even more so now as we get kind of into the future. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But really what I wanted to cover, and at a high level, it's not very technical. We'll get into the technical details of what all this means. But I titled this Continuous Improvement rather than Change Management because I thought it was a little bit more positive. But really this is about change management. And in the past, change was very hard, but quite rare. We went through about 10 years of kind of technological stability in terms of the PC LAN or the network, the desktop, the client server sort of world. Now change is happening faster and faster, driven by a number of different things. We have to stop and acknowledge our own appetite for change. How much do we think change is good? And how much do we think that change is actually bad? And what speed do you think change will be? And that's kind of a very personal question for each of you to kind of answer for your own organizations. And at Microsoft, we have some ideas that we'll share with you here as well. We're kind of in this together, too. For Microsoft, this is a very different world than it used to be. In a world of continuous improvement, our role changes quite dramatically from just a software vendor, which was a fantastic business. We could build software, we give it to you, and you could worry about it. Now, as we look at things like cloud services and more of these other things, the lines are blurring. The kind of DevOps is a term that we use more and more in IT circles to describe the not only are you developing, but you're also operating the thing that you develop, and you have this virtuous cycle of being woken up at 3 a.m. when your code doesn't work, and those sorts of things, which leads to product quality. Believe it or not, people don't like to be woken up. But finally, we'll talk about some of the changes you can look forward to as well. So, there needs to be a point to go through all this pain, to go through this change, and so we'll talk about that specifically around what we see with Excel, and then a little bit more holistically of what we see around across Office as well. To kind of frame the situation, many eras of computing. Generally, these are multi-decade eras of computing. The mainframe era back in the 60s. I like to categorize this as one computer per many users. It was a very interesting time. You'd buy computers the size of rooms. I'm sure some of you in this room will tell me about punch cards. I never got to experience that, but mainframe computing, where you rented time on someone else's machine or the organization's machine to do specific tasks, which really gave way to the personal computer era and around the 80s. This notion, and in the 80s it wasn't quite true, but the natural extension of that personal computer revolution was one computer per user. Every user had their own computer. Every user had their own, essentially, mainframe, more powerful than a mainframe, at their own fingertips. And of course, the mainframes, or that notion of one computer per many users, didn't go away. That still survived. In some cases, it still survived as mainframes. Believe it or not, IBM's still selling mainframes today. But most mainframe workloads kind of evolved to server workloads, built on the same personal computing infrastructure, running on the same Intel chips with the same processors, the same RAM, but run in a server room and those sorts of things. Fast forward to the 2000s, and really we're entering, and we're really coming out now. We're at the end of this mobility era. This notion of several computers per user. Show of hands, who brought more than one computing device to this conference? Yeah, kind of crazy. So we're definitely in this mobility era now where everyone's carrying multiple computers per user. The personal computer didn't go away. Show of hands who didn't bring a personal computer to this conference. Yeah, so the personal computer didn't go away. It changed from a desktop to a laptop to a tablet to two-in-ones to all sorts of weird and wonderful new device formats, but it didn't go away. Likewise with servers. Servers didn't go away either. We still see a lot of servers around, but we also see many server workloads evolving to this cloud computing notion as well, where rather than own your own hardware, own your own data center, you can just rent time in someone else's data center, whether that's through AWS, through Amazon, whether that's through Microsoft, through things like Azure and Office 365, or whether that's things like Google. And really that's kind of like the only three players. It's kind of amazing now that when you look at it's about 40% of servers worldwide go to those three companies, which is kind of an astonishing change in terms of the industry as well. And so those eras evolve, and as they evolve, it kind of has a profound effect on what the desktop looks like. And I really love this animation. If you haven't seen it before, it kind of it's an interesting view from like the 90s to now about how the workplace has really changed, and the things that traditionally we could consider would never get taken over by technology or computing have really transformed the workplace. He's using a Mac, which I'm obliged to say isn't realistic for 90% of the workforce, but yeah, it's kind of an interesting scenario as well. And from the Office team's point of view, we really liked the PC world. It was super simple. We had a Windows desktop and we had a Mac desktop. And that was kind of our universe. The universe of Office was those two platforms. That was 2007. It wasn't that long ago. Or at least it doesn't feel like that long ago until you look at technology from 2007. Then it feels like a decade ago. And now, like our computing kind of surface, or our constellation, or our universe of Office applications has kind of exploded as well. As Windows desktops, Android phones, tablets, mobile, Windows phones, like our cloud services, web apps, Apple Watch apps. If you told someone in 2007 that you'd be able to get PowerPoint on a watch, they would have laughed you out of the room. But that's what we have today. iPads, iPhones, and all of these kind of devices. At a high level, for the more technical, I've kind of drawn lines on there. And that really shows the kind of how we connect our code base. We're trying to get more and more code reuse across all of these applications. We kind of have still those two centers of gravity, the Mac desktop and the Windows desktop. Those two things share about 50% of their code these days between Mac and Windows. And then Apple Watch, iPad, iPhone shares about 80% of code with the Mac client. And then on the Windows side and the Android side, they share about 80% of the same code as well. That's just kind of for our sanity so that we can keep shipping features on all of these different platforms. But one of the things that's driving us to change the way that we release software and we speed it up is kind of this age-old challenge. And our old business was this notion of every 3 to 5 years, we would release a new product, whether that was Office, whether that was Windows or Windows Server or SQL Server. It was kind of a good, reliable cadence. That was about the hardware refresh cycle that most organizations were going through. It was about the same right cycle for IT budgeting and doing kind of sweating the asset and getting the benefits and deprecating the assets over time. But what was interesting is as we got better and better at writing software, there was more and more stuff we could change in 3 to 5 years. There was more and more features and improvements that we were making. And while features and improvements are great things, they also lead to more and more impact. And so in this analogy, you're kind of climbing the cliff face. And as soon as you climb that cliff face, 3 to 5 years later, you know you have another cliff to climb. And what we saw many organizations do is kind of fall behind and skip a 3 to 5 year release cycle, go from Office 2010 to Office 2016, or go from Windows XP to Windows 7. And what was happening, and the impact is, now you have 2 cliffs to climb at once, right? Your impact goes up higher and higher. And this became even harder. And what we saw is these very complex deployments starting to take hold, that you'd have to spend a lot of time, a lot of budget just to move the dial. And all of a sudden, we didn't think of these upgrades as things we just do as the kind of regular operations of an IT department. We brought in specialists and project teams and consultants to help us go through this major change. And oftentimes it was a separate set of skills that we didn't have in-house to make that kind of change as well. So that was hard. And it's got to the point in many organizations that the only way to get over this heavy impact sometimes is to kind of have a leadership change and have a new CIO or a new CFO. And what we see time and time again is that new person comes in with a mandate to transform the business and have a business transformation project, which is all about modernizing the way things get done, modernizing the tools that get done. And generally, it's kind of a condition of acceptance of that role that that person will say, I'll only take this role if the board or the CEO funds me to make this business transformation investment. And it'll be a payoff cycle of 5 years and we'll get everything back. And maybe you don't meet all of the requirements and maybe that person disappears 2 years later and you're left in the IT department still dealing with that technology and still dealing with that the next 3 years of paying off that effort, knowing that you're going to have to hit this heavy impact again. So we really hate that model. I'll probably talk too long on that. So what if we had smaller, more regular updates? Instead of climbing a mountain, we were walking up a hill. That every month or every week, there were just little changes that over time. Easier to digest, smaller pieces, more regular, so that you would build a muscle internally. You wouldn't need to go and reach out to external consultants to drive those sorts of change. It became kind of just a business as usual type operation for IT. The plus side, getting more updates more regularly means that those 10,000 engineers in the Office team can do less harm in a month than we can in 3 to 5 years. And so the amount of change and the impact to the users, again, is less and less. And so we call this the evergreen desktop. And this is very much a vision of us in the Office team across Excel and Project, Visio, Word, Outlook, all of the teams. And Windows shares a very similar vision, and all of the kind of desktop operations teams. On the cloud side, we do this as well. The difference is on the cloud side and the services side, we actually have to run the hardware. So we're kind of the victims of those heavy lift and shift projects as well. So we've been doing this for quite some time in our cloud services as well. So that's kind of the theory. To talk a little bit more about what we're doing in Office 2016, I'll get into a little bit more specifics around how that looks as well. So again, kind of in the past, a long feedback cycle. Now, new ways of working, new challenges, and the businesses change a lot faster than they perhaps ever have in the past. For Excel specifically, the things we focused on in this release of Excel was around bringing what we BI to the masses, and it's almost, I'm sure you've heard that term countless times already today, but what that really means is helping everyone do better ad hoc analysis, being able to blend data from structured sources and unstructured sources together, being able to use spreadsheets even if the data doesn't particularly live in spreadsheets. And then, of course, advanced capabilities we're introducing with Power BI desktops for better visualizations, better dashboarding, that you can take that work you do in Excel and essentially bring it to Power BI and share it with the rest of the organization. The other key thing that we really focused on this release was around bringing all of that data together and help you essentially treat Excel as the front end, even though the back end may be in multiple different sources. And many of you probably have far more expertise in Excel than I do, and you've been doing this for quite some time. But what we're really trying to do in this release is make it easier for everyone to do it. Make it easier for the marketing person to connect to Google Analytics and pull that data into Excel to build their own reports, or to connect to Facebook or Twitter data to see how their own social media campaigns are going, rather than just a very specialized business intelligence skill set and those sorts of things. And for IT, what we talk about a lot when we talk about the changes we've made in IT, in many cases these aren't as sexy, so to speak, but my favorite is definitely Outlook performance. Outlook in the 2016 release is about 20 to 30% faster than it was in the 2010 and 2013 release. That's important because we see more and more people take advantage of Exchange Online or cloud services mailboxes where the mailbox size is effectively unlimited. Now it's not uncommon for us to see 100 gigabyte mailboxes in Office 365. And the poor little desktop running an ultra low voltage Intel processor still has to compute all of that. And from our telemetry, we see that Outlook generally, on any given day, Outlook is run longer than the average workday for most users. Outlook works harder than you do, so to speak, when it's running. It never shuts down. It's always running. It's always chunking through gigabytes and gigabytes of mail that you keep sending yourself. And so we're pretty proud of that. In terms of deployment, we made a bunch of changes around deployment to try and make deployment easier, try and simplify a lot of that experience. And on the security side, we have a lot of pressure to keep up with new security threats. One of the big ones we've been focused on recently is around data loss prevention, the ability to protect the content specifically rather than the device, rather than the hard drive, but protect content. To put it another way, maybe you have a secret code name for a secret project. Every time that code name is mentioned in a document, you want to apply some sort of rights management capability to it. You want to make sure that's encrypted. If you're talking about a merger and acquisition, you want to make sure any content around that is encrypted in the fly without users having to do anything other than that. The other one, of course, is multi-factor authentication, the ability to smart cards, RSA tokens, and those sorts of things in the Office login itself, not just in the Windows login as well. So, who's heard of this? Show of hands. Office 365 Pro Plus. We have a lot of people at Microsoft, 10,000 engineers, and I like to joke that we have way too many people in the naming department. So what this is, Office 365 Pro Plus is our Office client. It's kind of the Office 2016 release as sold through an Office 365 subscription. The key difference between this and Office 2016 is that Office 365 Pro Plus is under continual improvement. We continue to add new features to Office 365 Pro Plus. We don't do that with Office 2016. Office 2016 will look the same as it does today, or the same as it does September 22nd, the day we released it, as it will September 22nd, 2026, when we finally deprecate it and our engineers can go on and work on something else. Office 365 Pro Plus we intend to add features over time. And so whether you see it as Office 2019 or Office 2020 or whatever other major name we decide to give an Office release, we expect Office 365 Pro Plus to gradually evolve into that release over time without a big change. Question? Good question. So the question was, is this a rebranding of Office 365? Office 365 is a suite of applications, a suite of services. The Office 365 Pro Plus is part of Office 365, and it's the client app piece of Office 365. So that's essentially how I describe it. It's also a SKU and a license, and so depending on what combination of Office 365 things you buy, you may have this or you may not have this. Questions? Yeah?
So I think your own website where there's 14 varieties of this?
Yes.
This is the one to buy. Why? It's impossible to find this on the website.
Yeah.
Why is this not the website?
That's a great question. So generally what we see is, yeah, so the question was, why are there 14 different versions of Office 365? And why isn't it easy to find this Pro Plus version? A couple of reasons. Firstly, our website is really targeted at small businesses. Most of our larger organizations that make kind of strategic IT decisions will do so through volume licensing. They'll have essentially a contract with Microsoft rather than a purchase from a website. And so it's there. You just need to go to products.office.com/enterprise/plans and look at Pro Plus. The second is our web team are very focused on driving web sales. And if you've ever been involved in web sales, you know there's a lot of optimization that goes on around what's the right path, what's the hero SKU, and what's the hero offering, and those sorts of things. So oftentimes the simplicity of this being the client kind of gets mixed up in all of that. Generally what we see, and this is true of people that buy through the website and people that buy through volume license contracts with Microsoft, is that we have a particular suite that we call Office 365 Enterprise Plan 3. And that's kind of the all-you-can-eat plan, E3. It includes SharePoint, it includes Exchange, it includes Skype for Business, and it includes Office 365 Pro Plus. And so that's kind of we'll just buy that and we'll be done with all of our productivity needs at once. And that's kind of the most common thing. The way that we structure licenses are they get cheaper the more you buy. And so often that's the thing that people look at. But Pro Plus is the specific enterprise capability that gives you Office Client. You can buy it standalone. There's also an Office 365 Business, which doesn't include Access, I believe, and it's a little bit cheaper, and that's capped at 300 seats. And so for smaller businesses, they look at those sorts of things. Again, I'm biased. I generally focus on many of our larger customers, and if you're in an organization with more than about 300 users, you'll generally trend towards a volume licensing agreement. You'll buy Pro Plus. And if you are a smaller organization that wants the same capabilities as a large organization, you'll generally trend towards Office 365 Pro Plus as well. Does that help answer your question? Yeah, it's complicated. It's probably the short answer. A question at the back too.
We had recently had an acquisition of a smaller company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. So the question was, if we just buy Pro Plus standalone, it doesn't come with Skype for Business. And so how do we get them to Skype for Business? So Office 365 Pro Plus does come with Skype for Business, the client. You need that kind of server counterpart to connect with as well. So you can buy the Skype for Business service to connect that with, and then it'll be fully functional. They may have customized their install, so they were hiding Skype for Business because they didn't have the client apps, but. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's catch up after this session. We can jump in and I can show you my experience and how we can customize that. So, in terms of a couple of differences, there is one other major difference between a subscription model on a client and the traditional client. We've changed the installer package, and the installer package that comes with Office 365 Pro Plus is something we call Click to Run. That's kind of some technical mumbo jumbo that basically allows us to stream updates to the client directly from Office 365 without needing to go and repackage and redeploy specific options. If you want to know more about that, there are thousands of hours of recordings of me talking in a monotone voice into the camera on the Microsoft Virtual Academy, which is mva.microsoft.com. It's where we do all of our technical readiness courses. Yeah? It is, yes. Well, so the question was, is it easy to distinguish for Microsoft the differences between Office 365 Pro Plus and Office 2016? It is. For Office 365 Pro Plus, there is telemetry that goes back and forth to Office 365. For Office 2016, depending on how you set it up, you may not share any telemetry with Microsoft. There's no centralized licensing activation or anything like that. That's often run on premises. What we also track, though, is connections to things like Exchange Online. And so we track sort of the versions of Outlook that are connecting to Exchange Online. And oftentimes when we notice a major change, we'll actually roll out proactive notification to the administrator to say, hey, you're connecting with Office 2003 to Exchange Online. Be aware that that's out of support and you're losing functionality with that. And so we do some proactive notifications on those sorts of things as well. For the IT department, you can tell quite easily the difference between Office 365 Pro Plus and Office 2016, either through inventory tools. There's some telemetry agents built into Office 2016 and Office 365 Pro Plus. You can check the registry, or you can check the backstage menu, which is our fancy way of saying file menu, and you go to options, or actually, sorry, account, and it will tell you whether it's Office 2016 or Office 365 Pro Plus. Question? Yeah.
Coexistence of Office 365 installed products versus new DLS legacy ones.
Yeah.
The conflict between Office and Project and Visio.
Yeah, it's a problem. So the question was, are there conflicts between the two deployment types, between a traditional MSI and a click-to-run package? And the answer is yes, there are conflicts. Why are there conflicts? Generally because Office uses a lot of shared components across applications. Project and Visio are probably 50 to 60% Office shared code that makes up how the ribbon renders and those sorts of things. So we get into DLL mismatches. Click-to-run is a virtualized package, which means it hides those shared components from Project and Visio if they're installed the other way. So you do get that mismatch. There are planned remedies, yeah. So we're working on that. And essentially what it looks like is to repackage the Project and Visio perpetual licenses as a click-to-run package so they can seamlessly coexist. What click-to-run does bring you, though, is it brings you the ability to actually have a true side-by-side experience between an older version of Office and the new version. So if you had Office 2010, you can actually install the click-to-run package on the same PC and have both available. That's something that you could do as a science project, but it would never worked well. With click-to-run, you can actually do that. So as long as the versions don't match, essentially the major versions don't match, they can exist side by side quite well. But Project 2016 MSI won't exist with Office 365 Pro Plus 2016 at the same time. So kind of the things that are the same, the client is still installed locally. The amount of people that say, well, it's Office 365, so it's cloud, so it's web, that's kind of faulty logic. Cloud is not web. The client is still installed locally, it still runs on the PC, it still goes offline. It still uses your local PC hardware and RAM. It's the same architecture in that we mean it's Windows 32 or 64-bit. You have the same deployment options in that you can package it with System Center, you can build it into your Windows machine, and so on. Still respects group policy, still has macros, still has VBA code, and still can use add-ins as well. The only add-ins that we find have problems are the add-ins that are written looking for a very specific version of Office. So you have a Bloomberg add-in that only works with Office 2003 or something like that, which is a bad example. Bloomberg apps work great on Office 2016 and Office 365 Pro Plus. But things like that you may have made yourself. What's new and different is the way it licenses is different. It's a user-based activation. So in a world where you have more users than devices, it's better to just buy Office for the user than it is for the device. That's kind of the big cost saving. If you're licensing by users, you need to know who your users are. So there's an identity and authentication complexity there that you need to look at. Even though the deployment options are the same, the deployment technology behind the scenes is quite different. And finally, the product updates and versions are quite different as well. So to kind of change tack now, when we talk about having updates that are always coming through and updates coming through every month or at any time into the client, generally what we hear from most people is that sounds really, really scary. We have spreadsheets that we really focus on. We have times of the year that we don't want any changes to go on. We're in change freeze, we're in lockdown. It's end of financial year. It's harvest season, and we don't make any changes during harvest season. Every business has something similar where we don't do changes over that particular time. And so you need to decide on how you'll cope with change, how you'll cope with weekly changes, monthly changes, quarterly changes. What is a fast turnover for you? We've heard loud and clear that it's no longer a 3 to 5 year release cycle. But at the same time, it's probably not a daily cycle, probably not a weekly cycle. And so the way that we make these changes at Microsoft, and this is more of a quality statement than it is a change management statement, but basically the feature team in Office will test a feature. They'll roll it out to all of the Office team. And once it passes that ring, we'll roll it out to all of the Microsoft team. It's about 120,000 users. Then we roll it out to what we call our first release program, which anyone can opt into. And then finally, we roll it out worldwide. And so this approach for us is really useful. At any time we find issues or errors, and we track telemetry through all of these for Office 365 and Office 365 Pro Plus. If we find issues, we essentially abort that ring and start again at ring 0. Wake up the feature team, and they have to fix it and start that process again. Depending on the fix, this can take, or not just fix, but update as well. Depending on what the change is, that can be done as fast as 24 hours, or it can be done as slow as 6 months. For security changes, generally those rings flow pretty fast, just because we have to in terms of security changes. For feature rollouts, and especially feature rollouts that have some sort of implication to the end user, generally that's done over time. And especially the longest time is often between this first release and this worldwide rollout. First release, you're opting in to seeing features fast. Worldwide is a different kettle of fish, so to speak. And so for Office, what this looks like is a couple of different views. So every feature in Office 365 follows this ring approach. For Office clients specifically, we have another lens of complexity or of choice, depending on how you want to look at it. The first is what we call the current channel. And if you think of updates and you think of a constantly evolving Office suite, essentially what current channel is that about once a month, when we feel that the product is at a high enough quality level, we're going to make a new update. And essentially that update looks like an entire new version of Office. It's a whole 1 gig package that we put out there and we say, this is the latest version of Office. It's not like the old Office. It's new. It's got new features. It's got whatever we've done that month. We post that up to Office 365, to our, what we call our content delivery network, which is a worldwide grid of really expensive stuff that you all connect to. And basically what happens is the Office clients will connect to that current channel and say, hey, there's an entirely new version. One of the nice things about Office 365 Pro Plus is it does that all in the background, seamless to the users. And then it essentially says, that version's different to the version I have. How much is different? And then it essentially does what we call a binary differential sync, where it essentially does a delta comparison of what it knows it has with what that new version is. And it just downloads the kind of binary deltas that it needs to transform itself into the latest version. So it's very different to a patch. We're very excited about that. I can talk for hours about that. It's probably really boring for the rest of you, so we'll move fast on that topic. But what you need to know about current channel, it's quality gated. It comes out about once a month whenever we feel the quality is ready. And then it goes up to the network, and machines all update with those latest features, those latest fixes automatically. This approach is great for our consumer users, our home users. It's been very difficult for Microsoft to teach good patching habits to grandpa and grandma. They just don't seem to get the Patch Tuesday cycle. And so this approach of having a self-restoring, self-updating Office client has been really, really valuable for those users. And also for business users where you kind of want to get out of the businesses of managing the day-to-day minutiae of patch management. Is there a question up the back?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. We have a virtual desktop.
Mm-hmm.
We patch it once a month on average. Normal patches.
Sure.
How would you recommend we move it to the 365? It's not that. I just looked at our SA version. We don't even have it available for, basically our download.
Sure. Good question. So, yeah. So, automatic upgrade sounds great unless you're managing your IT environment with some degree of common sense. And then you want to be very mindful and planful about how you roll these things out. So, by default, we can make this thing update itself with a simple switch or a group policy setting. You can change it to, instead of looking at Office 365 and downloading those bits, look for somewhere on your own network and only look for versions that are on your local network. Or you can even say, you know what, Office, don't even look for updates. You'll update when I tell you to update. And you'll use something like System Center to actually trigger that update. And so the actuality of having to push out the patch file and install the patch file is very different, but you still have that same control. So you can trigger Office to say, Office, now go and update yourself when you're ready. So you can essentially stage it all out and then roll out everyone at once if you need to as well. Challenges with current channel. Still changing every month. There's security fixes, there's product features in there as well. Generally, we don't like to delay the rollout of security fixes. It's kind of a blanket statement for IT in general. That's not something that we want to go out and push, wait and do a whole lot of testing, because the longer we hold back that security fix, the less we're secure. It also really sucks for application compatibility. If Microsoft is making new changes and changing the way Office works, that's also another way of saying Microsoft is potentially breaking something we're relying on in Office to do our job. And so this monthly model is really good, really fast. But we also have this notion of a deferred channel. And what deferred channel is that we commit to rolling up those updates 3 times a year. So you can decide that I don't want to take feature updates every month. I only want to see feature updates 3 times a year. And I'm going to do change management around that. I'm going to educate my users. And in addition to this 3-month rollout, because it's a deferred channel, you essentially have 4 months notice of whatever will be in that next deferred channel release. And we call this first release for deferred channel. Lots of big words in this approach. And it's essentially a staggered model. So in the red, this is kind of current channel that's chugging along every month. First release, we have this notion of the first release deferred channel. And so 3 times a year, we essentially synchronize those challenges, those channels. So in February, everything that was in February current channel, we kind of copied that and we put it in our first release channel. And that first release channel for the next 4 months got no feature updates. It only got security updates and critical bug fixes. And so what that means is that our ISVs that rely on Office and have deep integrations into Office can actually test and make sure that their add-ins, whether that's the Bloomberg add-in or the Oracle add-in or even the Power BI add-in, will work with Office. It also allows enterprises to get a sneak peek of what those features are. You can either get a sneak peek by looking at what was in current channel from 4 months ago, or you can look at the first release deferred channel and see what those features look like as well. And what we see already is that most organizations know who their early adopters are and will roll out that first release deferred channel to maybe 10% of their staff, whether that's the IT staff, people that opt in, and the kind of early warning system that you have in your organization to do those sorts of things. Then when it comes time to those, for the rest of the organization, we push out that deferred channel release. It happens in February, in June, in October, always on a patch Tuesday. So this is one you can set your clock by. This is not a quality-driven release. This is a time-driven release as well. Is that bad? Not really, because we've had 4 months to make sure it's a quality release. So that's why we can guarantee that it will be on a patch Tuesday, patch Tuesday, second Tuesday of every month. We can guarantee that it'll be a quality release by then because we've had 4 months actually stabilizing it as well. Any questions on this? This is a kind of a tricky topic that a lot of people ask me days later and email me to describe this again. Sorry? So on the portal side, you can actually choose to enable and disable first release, and you can. Exactly. So you can say, hey, these users, whether they install it themselves or get it through System Center, will always get this version. You can also choose whether you want to be on the current channel or the deferred channel inside of the Office 365 Admin Center as well. So this introduces another question, when do I get the features? I hear the Excel team talking about the fancy new virtual reality support for their new charts or something like that. When do I get it? Well, the answer is in current channel, as soon as it passes a quality gate. And in deferred channel, generally 4 months after you see it hit the particular release, generally. And to kind of illustrate that, I have an example here. So the Excel team decides to introduce a new feature. We'll call it the code name as Clippy. And so they add this feature in October. And in the current channel, that feature is there straight away. And it will show up in that deferred channel in February. And the reason is because in October, the current channel and the first release deferred channel were synchronized so that all features in one were in the other one. A few months later, they decide Clippy wasn't good enough. Let's introduce Clippy with a hat. Additional features. Now, Clippy with a hat is in March. Clippy with a hat in March in current channel doesn't occur in deferred channel until October. The reason is that because the deferred channel was synchronized, or the first release deferred channel was synchronized in February, the next synchronization point's in June. So that feature enters first release in June and enters the deferred channel in October. And so that's kind of an interesting quirk. Sometimes it's longer than 4 months to see some of these features depending on when it ships. The flip side is for the engineering team that is really interested in getting their features out to as many people as fast as possible, it actually forms this kind of positive feedback loop to try and line up your feature to make it into February's or June's or October's. Because they're the release cycles that all of the builds get synchronized. And if your feature is in as many builds as possible, it will see more user feedback faster. And so we expect those February and June, October months to be over time. They'll be the releases that you'll see more features. But again, that's not a hard and fast rule. That's just human nature and greed that's driving that. So it kind of comes back to how fast can you cope with change. And if you think that a 1 month notice period and change every month is a good approach, then current channel is what you can take advantage of. If you would like 4 months notice, deferred channel, and if you want no changes ever, Office 2016 MSI, and you have our full support until the year 2026, barring kind of climate change, Trump presidencies, or anything else that will happen in that time. Any questions on that approach? Okay.
What percentage of the larger corporations have you seen that are going to go current channel, and what percentage is going to push back?
That's a great question. It depends on the industry. And so some of our customers that have less add-ins, less extensions, generally customers in the technology industry want to be on the latest and greatest as fast as possible. Other organizations, we also see a mix. And so they'll say, you know what, our sales force aren't really responsible for doing high-level Oracle BI add-ins or anything else that we want to test. So we'll put them on current channel and we won't really care about them. But for our finance department, we're going to lock those suckers down to a deferred channel as much as possible. And so that's what we kind of see, that discussion going on internally at a lot of customers. From what we've seen so far, the other thing that we see is, when customers are evaluating, whether it's the IT department or someone like that, generally they play around with current channel and just see, let's just get the latest and greatest. Let's kind of see what Office 2016 and Office 365 Pro Plus are all about. And when they switch to getting ready for a production rollout, very quickly they move from current channel into the first release deferred channel, and they gradually roll that out until about 10%, and then the remainder they roll out the deferred channel. We think over time that we'd like to see more people on current channel because it means that there's less things that IT is worried about. We can treat Office just like you treat an iPhone app. You don't do a whole lot of testing. That thing just rolls out itself sometimes, for good and ill. But we'd like to see over time the pace of change and that IT being able to take changes faster. But there's nothing we're going to do to kind of force that in any time as well. So it's kind of a deep personal choice. So we are in this together, and again, this changes your relationship with Microsoft quite dramatically. From being a software vendor to being a cloud services provider is kind of an interesting journey for Microsoft and for everyone involved, from our sales team to our engineering teams. When we first started this back in 2007, our Office team hated this cloud model. Mainly because at Microsoft we have a policy that if you wrote in the Office team, if you wrote the code, you're responsible for the fix. So every time you request a bug, that bug is handled by the team that wrote the feature. And in a cloud services world, well, kind of the turnaround for the traditional hotfix, if you were the first one to report it, generally that took about 5 weeks to get back to you, which is nice. You could do it in business hours. In the cloud, where we have a 99.9% SLA, that only allows for 43 minutes of downtime a month. And so when there's an issue, you get woken up at any time of day, at any hour. There's someone on call from every team that owns code in Office 365 at any given time. And so in 2007, there was outcry. We said, we'll never ship 2010 on time because we keep having to get up and fix these problems with this crappy code running in our cloud services. Whose idea was this anyway? And about 6 months later, a funny thing happened. Code started to get better. without asking, developers were putting in additional checks and balances to essentially gracefully fail, not bring down the entire service, add things that essentially in the cloud you can get by running on 75% capacity. You just shut down those 25% of servers that are causing you problems, and you figure it out at 9 o'clock the next morning rather than 3 o'clock that morning. And so we kind of saw those sorts of things come into the product. And it's also changing the way that we talk to customers. We're part of your IT department now if you're looking at Office 365. We're shipping you updates. We're shipping you patches. It's important for us to tell you the status of Office 365 because essentially we're an extension of your own IT department. And that's, again, some interesting muscles for Microsoft to learn, and also interesting for customers to kind of react to. I get a lot of comments to say things like, hey, why are you calling us? And when it's Microsoft calling a customer, the first thing they often say is, how do I know it's really Microsoft? You guys have never called me in 30 years. What are you calling for now? Do you need money? So we try to do this in a little bit nicer ways through the admin center. Like a phone call is the worst way we've found to actually connect with our customers. Through things like customer engagement, direct feedback has led to things like better PDF support in OneDrive. In the Office clients, we've introduced this send a smile icon, so you may have seen this in Office. And through that feature, you told us really sensible things like, in the file menu, instead of calling something save and send, maybe you want to call it share. I'm like, you know what, that's a great idea. And it's also led to things like, hey, we need better password and expiration policies and those sorts of things that kind of come through our support queues as well. Question?
There's a lot of confusion about send a smile.
Yeah.
The guys from Microsoft have send a smile all the time because they're in that inner ring.
Yeah.
But it seems that once you get out to the final release, there is no send a smile.
Yeah, it's in the first release. And so we do hide it by default in the...
So most of us will never see send a smile.
Unless you enable it, yeah. Yeah.
How can you enable it?
It's a group policy setting as well, so you can actually turn it on by default as well, yeah. So also, we're kind of in this together, and now as a subscription, can you imagine if you subscribed to like Comcast cable or something like that, and it took 6 months before you could use the cable for the first time, or it took 12 months? Deployment is a real concern for us because the longer it takes for you to deploy the less value a subscription is. Why would you pay by the month if it takes you a year to deploy? You wouldn't start paying until a year later. And so we have this thing called Fast Track. Fast Track essentially is our answer to the problem that deployment's hard and we don't have the skills yet. And we want to automate deployment out of existence, essentially. We don't want this to be such a big problem for organizations to go through every year. And so essentially what we've done is we've taken some of our engineers away from building code and sending their time to be focused on actually helping customers onboard to Office 365, whether that's the Pro Plus client, Exchange, SharePoint, or anything like that. And this is interesting for us. I mean, traditionally this was a role played by consultants. Even at Microsoft, we had our own Microsoft consulting department that did many of these things. Bringing it into our actual product teams kind of changes the state. Having an engineer calling customers, working customers through these problems is really interesting because then they go back and they turn around to their peers and say, you know what, let's just automate that into the product. We don't pay these guys by the hour, so there's no incentive to make things longer and more difficult. These guys are incented to get the customer on board and make the product better. And so we have kind of a strategic approach that we've refined over the years around onboarding, driving value, and then envisioning what to do will make you successful. If you go to fasttrack.microsoft.com, there's a bunch of resources here around how to envision, how to drive the right adoption methodology, how to plan for success, how to take into account what scenarios we expect your users to use. In terms of the onboarding phase, we have assessment and remediation tools. You will actually be assigned an actual Microsoft person. It's not like autonomous like robot or anything like that. We have a fast track manager and a fast track engineer, so there'll be those two people that will work with you directly to work through all of these things. And if you need to migrate data from SharePoint or from Exchange, they'll also help you migrate from your current system you have into Office 365 as well. And all of this is provided at no cost. It's part of that Office 365 subscription. We like to say that kind of a service is something you do and a product is something you build. And Office 365 and Office 365 Pro Plus being a service, it's kind of a constantly ongoing thing. And so again, it does change your relationship with Microsoft. I'm almost out of time, so let me go through what's next really quickly. Bitness. Is it time to consider 64-bit Office? Yes. We've been on this journey. We first introduced 64-bit in Office 2007. At the time, we said, this isn't for general use yet. This is for application developers to start testing and validating. And really, there's no good reason why you'd need more than 2 gigs of RAM to run Excel or anything like that. And now we're seeing more and more organizations cross that threshold, not just in Excel, but also in Outlook. And so we see more and more 64-bit deployments going on. We haven't updated our guidance yet. That's something we'll be working on. We're really just waiting for some additional feedback. And one of the challenges is macros and app compatibility. And so we need a really good story around that before we will update our guidance to say, you know what, 64-bit only is a perfectly valid approach. I expect in 5 years we'll be saying no more 32-bit for Office. It's taken it's a long time ago now when you could actually buy a 32-bit processor. Question?
Curious, as far as your partners and plugins and add-ons and stuff, are they adopting 64-bit?
Generally, we have a long tail of partners and add-ins, which is quite challenging. We focus a lot on the kind of big ones, the most common ones. Most of them have moved to 64-bit a long time ago. There's a lot of abandoned, orphaned code out there, which is where we have a bigger challenge. We're building telemetry tools that both you can run it and you can rely on us to run it as well. Some other things that we're introducing: one-click forecasting, Delve Analytics. Delve Analytics gives you a view of how you spend your time inside of the organization as well. Introducing data loss prevention, essentially being able to show policy tips inside of Office applications like Excel to say, you know what, this Excel spreadsheet has social security numbers in it, so we're going to automatically encrypt that. Well, that's a public health record number, those sorts of things. So all of these capabilities are kind of the reason why you'll get additional benefit with being on a continuously up-to-date Office 365 client. And with that, I am way out of time, so thank you very much for listening. I'll let the other group set up. Thank you. Thanks, guys.